Hi, everyone, and welcome to another indie game preservation interview here at Hit Save. Today, I have with me some of the team members behind Wintermoor Tactics Club. Please introduce yourself. We'll start with Ben.
Hey, my name is Ben. I was the team lead on Wintermoor Tactics Club as well as the programmer on it.
All right. Hi, my name's Kyla. I was one of two writers on Wintermoor Tactics Club.
And I'm Ryan, and I did combat design on the game.
Awesome. And I'm Jonas Rosland, Executive Director here at Hit Save. We're going to talk about the Wintermoor Tactics Club today. But before we talk about the game, I want to dive a little deeper into who you are all behind the game here. So, can you tell me a bit about how you get started in game development? What was your motivation? And since we have many members here of the team, which is fantastic, we'll kind of go around the clock here.
Yeah, same order.
Yep, that works.
Sounds good.
Great. Yeah, I started in video games. So when I was 17, I wound up going to the University of Southern California for college in computer science, computer engineering, kind of a very normal thing. But it turned out that school had a major in video games. And I, as a 17-year-old, said, I love video games. I'm going to take this major. So I did, and when I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a job doing video games at Microsoft. I started out on the Kinect, wound up moving to the Halo games, and got to ship Halo 5. At which point, I discovered AAA games aren't really the thing for me. So I wound up quitting and founding an indie studio to make the game that became Wintermoor Tactics Club.
Yeah, that's really cool. Next up, we have Kyla.
I grew up always wanting to be a writer from a really young age. And just kind of like doing games as sort of a side hobby thing and studying writing and going to writing groups. And then when I was around 16, I got for Christmas Final Fantasy X and the first Kingdom Hearts game. And it was like, oh, hey, look, games can tell stories now. Like, that wasn't true for a long time. And so I kind of became more interested in this idea of like games as a medium to tell stories that is like different than other mediums and sort of what's unique about them. And so then went to school first for creative writing and computer science in undergrad, and then I also went to University of Southern California for grad school for their MFA interactive media program, and so got my master's in fine arts there, and learning about uh, games as a medium and the intersection of games and storytelling, and then worked for a while with a little indie company. It was then called Wemo Media, but it's had a few other names since then. I think it's WeVR now. They do a big VR experience called The Blue. But yeah, worked for them doing, at the time we were making an MMO screensaver,
Wait,
which
what?
yeah, it's I, like I could get into it, but it was exactly that. It was meant to be like an ocean screensaver, and but you could like interact with, like you would like buy little fish to have in your ocean, but then you could send them to other people's oceans and they would like tell you where they visited and things like that. And it was all supporting like ocean conservation charities and stuff. So it was a pretty cool project.
Well, that's really
Um,
cool.
yeah, it was fun. That was what the Blue originally was before it became a VR experience. And then we made a little mobile game called Super Fugu, which I think doesn't exist anymore because the App Store sheds games every like 2 to 3 years if you don't update them constantly.
Try months.
Yeah, yeah, fair. Yeah, you would know more about that whole ecosystem than I. And yeah, so then I enjoyed working there, but I was looking to move up to Seattle to be closer to some friends. So came up here and then was working on some other non-game related stuff, and got pulled into this project by some friends. So
Awesome. So you're writing and storytelling. Are you taking more from Final Fantasy, or are you taking the um, somewhat maybe nonsensical approach when looking at Kingdom Hearts?
Well, so listen, tread carefully because the Kingdom Hearts series is beloved to me. Um, I will sit and explain the plot of that game for 4 hours to you. Um, mark my words.
I would love it.
Uh, at some point.
And then you'll move on to Kingdom Hearts 2.
uh, yeah. So I don't know. I really like the sort of uniqueness of games as a medium for storytelling. Like I like thinking about how games can tell stories through their mechanics as much as through traditional things like dialogue, or text. And I think there's a few really neat things you can do when you force the audience member to be a participant in the medium that have to do with sort of empathy and encouraging like certain behaviors and thought processes that is communicates in a way that writing can't do in any other medium. I mean, I was attracted to Final Fantasy X and Kingdom Hearts because they were doing literary things that I hadn't seen in games before. Like Final Fantasy X starts in media res. It has a framing where, it's like right before the final battle, and then most of the game is like a flashback up to that point, which I'm like, I haven't ever seen that in a game before. That's really cool. And Kingdom Hearts had this weird like multi franchise thing where you went to different places that were all from different stories and they were interwoven in interesting ways. But both of those games have a very traditional linear RPG, like let's just stop and have a short movie explaining what's going on kind of thing. So in part my time at school kind of introduced me a lot more to like, okay, but what did the mechanic what story did the mechanics tell, like what how do you interweave those pieces. So we myself and the other writer Mike ended up working pretty closely with Ryan on making sure that like the combat mechanics were in support of the narrative and vice versa. So that's my kind of outlook and take on on game writing.
I love it. And yes, I'm absolutely going to take you up on your offer there around Kingdom Hearts. I would love for someone to explain the story to me.
That's like giving me a Christmas present. Like I would be so happy.
All right, Ryan.
Yeah. So my origin story, I was always a weird, lonely kid, and I grew up in a rural area, so it's kind of like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes. And usually, like the main way I engaged with people when I was younger was by play and like kind of creating imaginary games with them and stuff like that. So when I first got my like first like video game console and was introduced to that and like playing around with computers and stuff like that, it was kind of like, oh, I can get a computer and like make a version of how I play with people and then just like outsource my human interaction to to as many people as possible, and then they'll like me. Uh, so then, yeah, from basically when I was around like as soon as I was aware that it was a thing I could be, I wanted to be a game designer. Even
Mm-hmm.
more than just like player or anything. It was literally like the process of making games is what I was most attracted to. So yeah, kind of really focused on getting into a college where I could do that. And around the time I graduated high school, UC Santa Cruz had a computer science game design program. So it was the typical computer science major, but it had a lot of kind of media classes worked into it and a few game development specific courses. So you could kind of focus on that. And yeah, basically a week before I graduated, I managed to land a job as a game designer at a free to play mobile company. Did lots of level design on like bubble shooters for the most part as it bounced around the Bay Area. I did about almost 2 years at a robotics company randomly, working on kind of toys to life stuff. One thing I was just, as a developer, I've always been interested in is like getting to design for like new systems and new challenges and everything. So ultimately, the kind of like fast follow nature and like very profit driven nature of free to play mobile really burned me out and made me kind of cynical. And there was a bunch of like major layoffs that kept happening, so it kind of felt like I'm selling out and it's not paying. Um, and I, through a friend and everything, was introduced to Ben, like basically right after a major layoff when I was looking for work, and landed a part-time combat design role on Wintermoor Tactics Club. And it was kind of like my first chance to like really like strike out, work on like an indie project, and have a lot more kind of ownership of my work, and work on a game where the main goal was, you know, to make the best game that we could, and with a lot of like care for the player and stuff, which felt a lot better for me and everything. So yeah, I picked up this job along with my current gig on Team Meet, and struck out to like live in my cousin's trailer in Oregon and downsize a bit from my Bay Area life. And yeah, I've been doing indie stuff since. But yeah, mostly level design. Just I have a lot of experience grinding out a lot of content. So Wintermoor Tactics Club was also like a great opportunity to make a much more polished and focused experience. Um,
How do you just randomly spend 3 years in a robotics company?
oh, so it was two. It was basically 2 years, like 1 year, 9 months. I did two projects with them. I was it was I think Anki. They did the Overdrive, like the Drive, and then Overdrive series, and then they also made this little robot, Cosmo.
I
Um,
remember the Anki. That was the
yeah,
racetrack thing. That was a big hit at one of the Apple events, right?
exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, they hired me about a year after they kind of blew up from that. I was part of like the big hiring wave from that. But yeah, it was just it was a place that I had looked at and convinced myself I wasn't like good enough to work there. But it seemed really cool because it was like toys to life. It was like robots acting out in the physical world games. So like it had interesting new mechanics and like new things to consider when you're like coming up with stuff for it. And yeah, they ended up actually having a recruiter reach out to me after I had like passed like even applying, and ended up, yeah, getting a technical design role on that. So I did a lot of like UI stuff and building tools for the game design team and everything. But then they kind of pivoted away from toys and into more consumer robotics right after Cosmo launched. So I
Hmm.
got laid off along with the game design team. And yeah, but no, I definitely, it was a really interesting kind of like aside in my career, and yeah, I don't think Anki still exists. I think they went under a few years later. But Cosmo got picked up by something else, so I think that little robot still lives as a like teaching kids how to program kind of toy.
That's neat. Yeah, as a parent, I'm definitely looking forward to doing robotics with my daughter as
Mhm.
well. I think that's going to be super
Awesome.
fun.
There's a lot of great stuff out for it right now.
Oh, it's a fantastic market right now. I'm having a lot of fun just looking at things that I want to do in a couple of years, and in a couple of years it will be even more fantastic, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
So, Ben, I want to dive into you talked about your background in AAA studios. What made you go, hey, I want to do this game? I really want to create this. What was the backstory to the game and the inspiration for the game?
Yeah. You've probably heard, if you read Kotaku like at all, this concept of AAA game studios often have a lot of crunch and kind of create these, soulless working environments, I think is roughly the way to put it. And 343 is a fine and good place to work at, but it does have elements of that, which is to say, after I shipped Halo 5, I was in a very lucky place where I kind of got to check this big box that I think a bunch of people enter the games industry to check this box of making a game that they as a teenager would have loved to play. And having checked that box and discovered that, my life isn't over and I'm not ready to walk into the sea yet, and I didn't really have that great a time working on Halo 5 anyhow, it came to this question of what do I want to do next? And the answer was I still like video games. And I discovered that this sort of feeling of I shipped Halo 5 and, it was an experience that I'm looking to expand on rather than just repeat for Halo 6 or whatever, was fairly common throughout the studio. So I was talking to an artist who also worked on Halo 5 alongside me named Justin. And he had the exact same feelings I had. And we basically came to the conclusion of, we probably could just start a dang old indie studio. We have the experience because we shipped a game. We are an artist and a programmer team, which is a pretty decent team of two for creating a game. And we took off and did it. So I guess the answer was everything else seemed even worse.
And you were like, I'm going to spend 6 months making a game.
God, let's not emphasize. So
It only took 6 months. That was all.
it did not take 6 months.
Of course it didn't.
When we first started, when Justin and I said we would take off from our jobs for 6 months and create this game. At the time, it was called Rivensdale Academy Tactics Club. We changed the name from Rivensdale Academy to Wintermoor. But we actually had a fairly similar idea to what shipped early on. What we discovered is you can't get all your ideas into a game in 6 months. It took 3 years and 9 months to ship the game. Which is actually not that bad, depressingly.
Yeah, just a tad longer.
Yeah, it's especially not that bad for mostly part-time people on a team. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of indie games go like 7 years, in the 6 to 8 range.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the story is, Justin and I started out on this. The core idea was we wanted to make a goofy game about kids kind of finding themselves in a boarding school in winter 1980s is where we settled on, and all of those things still very much exist in the final product. But we fairly quickly realized that we wanted to do a game that was focused on characters and writing, and Justin was an amazing artist who actually created the rough concepts for Alicia, Colin, and Jacob, our main characters, quickly, and we settled on them and we were happy. But we needed someone to create better writing and stories than we could, which is how we pulled on Kyla's good friend and the person who eventually convinced me to hire Kyla, Mike, the other writer. And things snowballed from there, going from a 2-person 6-month job to about a 10-person 3-year 9-month job, which is good because we were successful enough to be able to pull that off. But my God.
So, as you were growing the team here, you said you ended up with 10 people in total?
That's including like outsourcer contractors. But yeah, we had 6 people who were kind of the core of the team who we would all talk together on Slack a whole bunch. And those of us who were in Seattle would meet every weekend at a boba place to do, stand-ups is what they call them in the tech world.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question regarding one of the outsourcing teams that you use there. I was going through the credits. Been playing through the game. I was going through the credits yesterday, and I saw that you had a diversity and inclusion team that you reached out to as well. Can you tell me a bit more about how that went?
Kyla was actually one of the people to take lead on that. So
yeah, so that was sort of a kind of an interesting thing, which is we, because of the when Mike and I got there, we were already given these 3 main characters. Here are your main characters that the story is going to be about. And the main character is a young Black teenager. And we were like, well, no one on the team is Black. And, we want to make sure that we are, we're like, we worked really hard, like did research. I did, like readings by Black authors about being and growing up in boarding schools. And, like we like worked really hard to like think of our characters as 3-dimensional people and really think about their backstories and what influences them and like who they are as people and their personalities. And but we also knew that there was a chance that there would be something big that we overlooked that we would screw up. And we were we were very conscious of that. So like for instance, I had seen this Twitter thread that someone, I followed had posted about like, hey, for people doing media stuff, here's stuff that most people don't know about Black women's hair and like how it needs to be taken care of. And I'm like, shoot, like it seems like based on this that Alicia should probably wrap her hair at night. Like that's a thing. But like I don't know anything about that. I'm like, I've read one Twitter thread on it, so I have this general idea. So we're like, we need to send to a like we need to hire a diversity reader. We need someone who is like gut checking us and fact checking us, who actually knows what they're talking about. And there's actually a lot of places that do that now as contract work. We were there's a weird, like there's a few different ecosystems. Most of the time, games ones can be a little more expensive because they have to play your entire game,
Hmm.
and that takes a lot of time. But we were able to find a group that does it normally for screenwriting, and we just like gave them our like novel sized script from the game of like, here's all the words in the game that happens. Here you go. And they were able to like read it as more like as a novel or screenplay. And we got some good feedback from that. She was confirmed that like, yes, like wrapping her hair would be a thing that you should include. And like, so we made sure that that got in. She told us like, you're tiptoeing around using the word black at the end, like in this speech towards the end of the game. You can just say black girls, that's fine. And so, like little things like that. So, she confirmed for us that we were like mostly going in the right direction, but she also provided us with with some important details and some good stuff to include that I think was worthwhile for us to have done. So I'm really glad that we ended up reaching out. I encourage other indie teams to do that.
I remember that was almost a compliment that, yeah, there was a conversation between the only two Black women in the school that originally Kyla and Mike were afraid of trying to push too much on the we are two Black people talking to each other in case you made it sound, off or wrong or just feel inauthentic. And the writer's take was actually all the rest of this seems to feel pretty authentic and you should push more on it, which was nice. I don't know. That was a nice take to have.
I love seeing that. And yeah, I agree, Kyla. I think it definitely more teams, more indie developers, and AAA studios for that matter.
Yeah, I kind of take it as a given that AAA studios should be doing this. I hope all AAA studios are doing this. But in indie, it feels like you might have the excuse of like, well, we don't really have a budget, we don't have much we can do
Hmm.
about it. But we got it done for, it wasn't like crazy expensive.
It was
And
like
it's
$300. It was fairly inexpensive.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it's worth doing.
definitely, definitely. If it leads to a better experience for everyone, that's just all that matters. That's fantastic. Um, so I kind of want to dive into the game here a little more. So the development process, Ben, you touched on this a little. What did the development process look like? You said you met at a boba place for some sprints.
Hmm.
How did it look like day to day, week to week, month to month throughout the game?
Yeah, we actually tried to keep to fairly classic, best practices, I think is the term. One nice thing about the studio being created by two people who came from, a 300-person style giant AAA studio is we already had ideas about, we had seen good implementations of pipelines to get people who want to work on a game to all work on the same game together. So kind of moving into like more Silicon Valley tech style, how does this get implemented? We, everyone was very encouraged to communicate everything, and everything was very open on the idea that everyone should know everything that is happening in the game so that they can change what they are working on in order to better coincide with, what's happening in art or what's happening in audio. We would have every other week, I would make a big PowerPoint presentation and force everyone to meet up synchronously to watch it, and
And it would
to talk.
always start with a cat joke.
Oh, not just cat jokes.
Not just cat jokes. It would always
Yeah.
start with a bad joke.
Yeah. There's this problem that I struggled with of how to avoid making this studio feel soulless, because I thought if a studio felt soulless, we would release a soulless game and everyone would immediately forget us. But when you grow even to just 5 to 10 people, which might sound small on paper, you find that you need to implement a lot of the pipelines and behaviors that cause studios to ultimately become soulless. So there was always a balance between those two. And one way that I tried, putting some soul back in was I allowed myself to stick a dumb slide at the beginning of every update presentation. And they mostly turn out to be jokes. Sometimes there are pictures of our cats, like here's my cat Calculus. I'm sorry that you've been seeing my cats like go across the screen
I love
all
it.
this conversation. It was fun, and it was a good way to. I think that the game came out with soul, so I guess that part succeeded.
I'd also, if we're talking like production and pipeline, I feel like we have to shout out Jackie, who like of a 6-person team, which is like a tiny core team, one of them was a producer. And I feel like, Jackie came on and kept us all organized and like doing the things that we said we were going to do and like, keeping
Mhm.
the deadlines and making sure that the right work was getting done at the right times. And
She was also an all-star
She
at
was
like
great.
every conference, like just really engaged with people and managing the booth and everything. Like, yeah, made it very easy for us to each do like our independent jobs and everything.
And she generally tried to be a helpful person. Where the word producer is very overloaded, I think, in tech. Like many people can have jobs called producer or program manager and do two totally different things. But she was very good at there were tasks that would fall through the cracks because they weren't really programming and they weren't really art and they weren't really design. And Jackie was the person who was able to take them all on and just accept that, this task needs to be done and I'm the person to do it, which is great. So she is now at another game studio, I think, which is very lucky for them.
yes.
So, with regards to the development process here, so you have it is now released on PC. It is released on Switch, PlayStation, and Xbox platforms. What did the porting of the game look like?
Oh, yeah. Thankfully, there are a bunch of outsourcing studios that explicitly exist to port your PC game to other consoles. So we were able to pass a decent chunk of the work to one of those outsourcing studios, a group named Kitty Face, funny enough. They were great, and it was mostly a programming problem at that point, which meant essentially I spent 3 months debugging some very nasty memory issues with one of these porting engineers as we tried figuring out. For what it's worth, Switch was the most difficult one because Switch has the lowest amount of resources because it's a handheld device as opposed to the
Yep.
Xbox One and PS4. So we spent a lot of time figuring out how to reduce file sizes and how to deal with the fact that its memory loading architecture was different than everyone else's. It meant a lot of doing that. It was kind of a pain.
Would you do it again?
Yeah, oh my god, Switch. This is a bit of a like bloodless business decision, but Switch sold better than Xbox and PlayStation 4. It sold almost as well as PC, which is our number one seller.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in terms of the ratio of effort put in to results come out, absolutely.
So I'm currently playing it on my Switch,
Nice.
just because of the handheld. It's just fantastic. I got PC, I got PlayStation as well, but if I can play it on handheld, that's what I'm gonna do. And I would say it's a perfect couch game as well. It's super chill. Just reading through the stories. I've been having a blast going through the game and just exploring, talking to all the NPCs and all the other characters here. It's super fun.
Kyla, do you want to talk about Hygge? Am I pronouncing it right?
Oh, Hygge or Hygge? I don't.
Oh my god.
Jackie's the
That
one who
one?
actually. Yeah, Hygge. Jackie's the one who actually knows how to pronounce it correctly. It's a Danish question mark
You mean
word.
Hygge?
Yeah, that
Hygge.
one.
Hygge. Yeah,
Huga.
Do you know it?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
I
It's
just I just googled it.
yeah, it's Hygge.
Huga.
So I'm from
Huga.
Sweden. We
Oh,
have the
There you
same thing, which is called fika.
Okay.
Hmm.
So you could probably explain it at least as well as I could, if not better. But this, yeah, the concept of like coziness and like getting to like hang out with friends in a warm and like soothing environment. So we always like at cons and things we would say like, yeah, this is a game that we want you to like curl up with the way you would curl up with a good book, right? Like drink your hot chocolate, like be in a nice little blanket, maybe have your Switch and play it it's a cozy game. We want it to feel cozy.
I absolutely agree there. Yeah, as I said, I've been having a blast playing through it. I'm a slow reader, but I really enjoy the witness. I was cracking up when I was going through the library and just reading the descriptions of all the different parts of the library, all the shelves.
I love the library. Mike and I hid two separate references to Jorge Luis Borges in the library, and it's like the library is the best combination of our like most highbrow literary jokes with our like absolute dumbest low level jokes. It's like the full range of Wintermoor humor.
Yeah, it's
I remember one of the best compliments. Oh, sorry.
no. So go ahead.
One of the best compliments I ever got at a convention was people who were at PAX and could do anything they wanted at PAX would go through the library because it was part of the demo scene and read every single book title and be like, haha, nice. Like that's great. If you'd rather read our book titles than do whatever you want to do at PAX, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So let's dive into the game itself. Um, I'm gonna switch screens here and see if we can do some artwork. There we go. So I want to first start with some of the characters that we have of the game, but actually, no. Let's start with the game. Explain the game. What is it about?
Who's best for that?
Who's most recently done the elevator pitch for it?
I particularly never
I think
trusted myself.
okay, I'll do the elevator pitch for it. The elevator pitch for it is you are students from a tabletop gaming club in a small northeastern boarding school in 1981. You're a bunch of nerds. The only place you fit in is at this club. And then one day the principal announces that the entire school and all its clubs is going to be involved in this giant snowball tournament, and the clubs have to compete with each other, and if you lose or you refuse to participate, your club is just disbanded forever, because he's trying to narrow it down to find some kind of ultimate club. And so the game is about trying to survive the club using the tactics that you learn from your tabletop gaming to apply to these snowball fights that you have to do. And also it's about like reaching out to other clubs that have been disbanded, and learning about people and making friends, and saving the world with the power of friendship and imagination, like all good stories.
I love it. And we see some of the main characters here as well. So let's dive into the characters. There we go. So here's our first character. Who is this?
This is Alicia. Alicia is in a lot of ways me as a teen girl. She's like nerdy, and she loves reading books about like empowering female protagonists, and she really likes tabletop games. She is also not me in a lot of ways because she is very like shy and avoids confrontation, which was absolutely not me in high school. But
She's also the player character, and she wants to be a
Hmm.
writer when she grows up. So you get to do a lot of writing scenes with her, where you write tabletop campaigns.
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the more exciting features that we all collaborated on. We we scaled back a lot of it for a lot of reasons, but yeah, we ended up with a bunch of stuff in the battles actually being reflecting what you choose during these kind of multiple choice creative writing like Mad Lib sequences,
Yeah.
where like the kind of like theming that a certain enemy would have would determine like what it would look like and what it would be named a lot of the times. Or you could have a recurring villain, or choose to just drop it off and create new villains and stuff. And I think we even have an achievement for if you keep bringing back the villain from the
Yeah, use
first
the same.
It's
campaign.
one of the rarest
Yeah,
ones. Yeah.
use the same recurring villain 4 times.
I do actually think that that's probably a good thing though, that that one's so rare, because it means that people actually wanted to like try out different character designs as opposed to just like, yeah. But it's if you're that kind of DM, which I actually was when I was in high school, of just like I love like Maester Seymour in Final Fantasy X, of just like that just obnoxious boss that you fight in so many different forms who just keeps coming back. You can actually do it in this one.
Yeah.
Um,
And we would say a lot sort of during the dev process that Alicia's superpower is her empathy. So like her,
Mm-hmm.
her whole thing is about being the one who like can reach out to other people and cares about other people and cares that they're doing okay. Which is it's a tough stretch for her because she is one of like only 2 black girls at her entire school, and so she has a lot of problems with feeling isolated and sort of lonely. And this tabletop club is like the place where she can fit in and find something that helps her belong. And so she shares that by reaching out to others. And we wanted to kind of give the player that feeling of like reaching out and trying to think about these other characters that you bring in, and how that how that feels, and how can we do that mechanically. And so I think it was Mike who had the idea of like, well, rather than us writing a story that's like this partly also came from we wanted to write like, okay, she's going to write these stories for these new characters, and it's going to be a metaphor for the characters' problems, a la Persona 4, and they play through the tabletop game to address the characters' problems. And Ben, I think, was like, I don't think people get subtlety and like metaphor. Like we may have to be a little more blatant. And so Mike had this idea of like, well, what if we force the player to write the metaphor, right? Like, what if the way we explain the metaphor is the player picks the metaphor, right? Where Alicia says, like, this person is like really shy, so I need an excuse for him to reach out to people. What would be a good reason for him to reach out? And then we give you like 4 metaphors, and you choose the one that applies to that, and then it impacts the combat side, right? Like it affects the mechanics. So you're like, I think this is the coolest villain for the person to face, and then like that becomes in the mechanics who the villain is and like what their powers are. And so Alicia's empathy was kind of the writing character concept around which a lot of the mechanics in the game were designed.
Although it was something that we didn't want to weigh down with a lot of like rules baggage or like extra text or explanation, but we didn't want people to feel like they were going in blind. So we did end up scaling back a lot of it to just be kind of aesthetic, like when it came to the combat, and focused on like the narrative.
There's
So
still
it's
a
kind of,
couple things that
yeah,
survived, I think, right?
yeah. So for Baphomet's main storyline, that one, the like one of yeah, I think the final battle that she does in her
Yeah, I think
campaign.
her final boss, and
Um,
I think Duncan's final boss, right? Like their mechanics, because there's like the one that's
yeah,
like the spider that gives birth to baby spiders or whatever. That's
yeah,
that's a mechanical thing.
And Baphomet has a portal you can
yeah,
close.
and like Baphomet's, it's like you get to pick like the way that the portal is being held open, and that determines like, do you fight 2 like powerful mobs? Do you have to clear out a bunch of little ones? But that one, it was like the alternate objective fight, and whatever alternate objective you had was determined by the campaign. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think ultimately it was probably the right call to scale back a lot of the rule stuff, as like cool as the gimmick might be.
But you
But
also worked really hard when we were designing side quest stuff to make sure that like we have this thing where you gain upgrades in the game by like reaching out to other people on the campus, and a lot of them like members of your team. And so I know you did a lot of work to make sure that like the upgrades that you unlock by talking to this person are the upgrades that work better with that person in combat, so that it makes you stronger like as a pair to fight with that person.
Yeah, I could definitely like probably later if I'm talking about like combat and progression and everything, but I'll definitely elaborate a lot more on that once we're more focused on combat.
That sounds great.
Because yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff with the combat and specifically how it was like supporting the story. Mostly because like I came on pretty late in the project. A lot of stuff was pretty established by that point, and my main kind of role was like coming in, evaluating the combat, and working off playtest feedback and working with everybody else on the team to try and like really make the combat more supportive of the story and everything. As opposed as opposed to being really focused on it being like a hardcore like mechanical game or anything. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll dive into that in a bit. So let's go to the next character that we have, Colin.
Colin. I feel like there's a problem in a lot of video games where you can't give your main character an arc because they're the player character and you kind of always have to like them, right? Like you want the player to empathize with the character that they're controlling. And usually when you don't, it like makes for some weird dissonance. Like I can think of Catherine is a game where like you hate the player character and it's like it makes for a weird experience. And because of this, a lot of games do a thing where like the villain gets the arc instead. And I kind of think Colin fell into that a little bit. So Colin is the founder of the club. He's the character that cares the most about tactics and like really feels has very strong opinions about the rules and how the game works and what's good and what's bad in there. And he's like, because of this, he like our game is a lot about the idea of identity and like why you shouldn't build your entire identity on one single thing. And Colin's problem is he's kind of built his entire identity around this club. And so when new people start coming in, he starts to feel like threatened and defensive. And spoilers for our game, but there's also like, a powerful, evil, magical force like that blows up these feelings and and makes them worse and kind of forces you to fall into these mental traps of paranoia and defensiveness and isolation. And so our arc, the Colin kind of gets the arc in like a, the point of the game being like gatekeeping is bad. And so like Colin's is a well-meaning guy, but he's kind of a gatekeeper, and he gets sort of like worse and worse over the course of the game until there's like a final confrontation in the end where you have to be like, Colin, remember, like you are more than this club. Like it's not, you are not all of like only tactics. You are a person who has depth and who can do other things, and you need to like chill out. And so you rescue him from the evil influence, and he kind of like it occurs to him like, shoot, I've been actually like being kind of a terrible person to everyone else in this club, and I really need to like work on myself and be better about that.
It sounds like this is a real life lesson as well that a lot of people will experience, I guess, because it's easy, especially as a teenager, to kind of tie yourself and tie your identity to another group of people that are like you. So I definitely like that metaphor here too.
Gamergate and the alt-right slash alt-right were happening while we were creating this game. You okay, Kyla?
Yeah, sorry, I just swallowed some water the wrong way.
Oh, yeah. And part of the moral we wanted to teach about you are more than your club, kind of, we felt like it gained special emphasis, and we were shaped by seeing Gamergate and seeing these people who were so associated with this idea of being a sort of, a hardcore gamer who is rude to other people. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Gamergate type.
Yep.
We wanted to give them a non-didactic and not judgmental feeling way to say, here is where you are wrong and here is what you should do to right yourself.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
It was super interesting because the very like original idea when Mike and I first came on was this was going to be like a pretty traditional underdog sports movie type narrative where it's like the geeky nerdy club against everyone else and defeating the popular kids. And then like the more we sort of looked around at the modern landscape, we were like, actually the problem is like everyone thinks they're the underdog and they use that to justify treating everyone else like garbage because they think like, well, we're the good ones who like are persecuted and like everyone else is against us. And we're like, actually that attitude is kind of what the problem is. So like that attitude is going to be our villain. And then the game will culminate around like beating that idea.
So, talking about underdogs, we have our third character here as well, um, Jacob.
Yeah, a lot of people's favorite character, I think, based on what I've seen for streamers.
Baphomet wasn't in the demo version that I played when I was interviewing for this, but Jacob was an immediate draw for me as a character. I think like in my interview, like the first thing and like the biggest thing that I just kept being annoying about was like he's like tagging a wall early on, and at least in the version that like I played as part of the test, like nothing happened based on you answering what tag you should do, and it kept me up at night. Like it drove me insane. And like so much of yeah, what ended up being like really evocative for people in Wintermoor and stuff that I think we should all be very proud of like adding in to like the story was having that kind of cause and effect where like the choices you make, even if it's just an aesthetic thing or anything, kind of carry on throughout. And yeah, so we ended up with not only the spray paint actually getting filled out with what you put, but there was a whole side quest thing later on where someone vandalizes his vandalism, and he gets really upset about it, and it's just extremely cute. Like they try to make his like Wintermoor's fascist like message into something wholesome.
Yeah.
I think they scratched out the shis, so it became Wintermoor is fast growing,
Or
or
fascinating.
Fascinating. Yeah. So
oh,
it,
that's yeah.
yeah, so it was originally going to be like Wintermoor is fast becoming like a world, like a leading school or something like that, but that was too long for the wall. So yeah, whatever you choose with Jacob depends. So it's like if you say Wintermoor is hell, it becomes Wintermoor is hello. If you do Wintermoor is fascist, it becomes Wintermoor is fascinating. If you do Wintermoor is lame, it becomes Wintermoor is blameless, which is maybe the most ominous.
Yeah, especially with the whole like the principals trying to get you to like fight
Yeah.
against your friends and like
And
dissolve
I
your
forget
social circle.
what's the
Oh,
third
we
one.
should.
But
Oh,
yeah, we should
we
probably talk
should
about.
mention.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like who Jacob is,
Yeah.
which is kind of the
Yeah.
comic relief character. So when we first created the core trio of Alicia, Colin, and Jacob, it was driven by this idea that there is a sort of almost a Jungian archetype of a trio, I guess, to drop a like $10 phrase in the conversation that you see in a bunch of Disney movies and also like Steven Universe. And the main character, the one that's supposed to be the player stand-in, is usually a fairly average-shaped human being. And then there is a tall, gangly character who's comic relief and who kind of is goofy. And there's just like a very big character who is the leader of a group. So you see this in like Steven Universe, and you see this in they just did it in Raya and the Last Dragon, which I just watched over the weekend. And we created our three character archetypes based on that. So Alicia is the most average, shaped character, and she's the player stand-in. Colin is the big leader character who also wound up being our villain, and Jacob is the goofy, gangly, comic relief character.
Yeah.
He would be a stoner if our game talked about weed, but our game does not talk about weed. He is,
He has
very
a political ideology. No one knows exactly what it is, but he has one.
his
And
political ideology is he's discovered the names of all the politicians that make his history teachers groan and roll their eyes, and he just shouts them out.
yeah.
Yeah, he's contrarian, and kind of like he causes chaos, or like, and he ties it to like this idea, like this vague ideology, but it's just like a justification for he just wants to act out, and it's ultimate, like he's that very typical kind of person who is resisting actually growing up by finding a way to justify childishness with grown-up words a lot of the time. I feel,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
he's very relatable to
And
anyone who
he's
went
also
through a like complain on the internet about leftist issues too much phase while not actually doing things.
yeah,
He would have a
A bit.
rose in his Twitter tag nowadays.
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, he's also very privileged. Like we get into it in one of the side stories, but like he comes from a very wealthy family and they like donate a lot to the school which kind of protects him from getting kicked out. And he's like aware of this privilege but also rebelling against it because he like recognizes that it's unfair. So he's sort of one of those like, he calls himself a punk, but he kind of doesn't actually have that much punk cred. um like
There's a great side quest about that.
yeah.
Oh, I guess just side note, this should probably be labeled with like, yeah, massive spoilers for story and stuff in the game. Even though
I'll
I'll
make sure
Yeah.
to tag this as spoiler-ish or
yeah,
spoiler
Yeah.
filled.
I don't want to like hold back on talking about actually like useful information if
Yeah.
just because of spoilers. So
Yeah, but yeah, Jacob is I feel like he's based on a sort of person that a lot of people knew in high school, right? Like
or
he has
were.
or were. Yeah, that's I feel like we get half and half of that when I watch streamers. Like half of the people go like I knew that guy in high school and half of the people go like I was that guy in high school. But he's ultimately well-meaning. He cares about his friends. He's just also kind of like a burnout. Like he doesn't really care that much about doing things. He
Yeah.
just he named his C&C character Robespierre Trotsky Guevara because
I just love that
originally
name.
yeah, because originally he just named the character Rougey, and because he's lazy and his character was a rogue, and then retroactively he's like, actually, let me pick these like political leaders from the past who've led revolutions. And we actually got called out on that, I think, on our Steam page, where someone's like, these are like horrible people in some cases, right? And we're like, listen, Jacob didn't think very deeply about this. Like Jacob likes revolutions. He doesn't really care much about the meaning behind the revolutions. And so
Yeah,
he
Jacob's part of C&C, I think. Whereas Alicia's part of C&C because she loves fantasy worlds, and Colin is because he loves both fantasy worlds and rules. Jacob is part of C&C, I think, simply because it is counterculture at
Mhm.
the time, and so we can see every character's fantasy version of themselves kind of reflects what they care about. So Alicia has, this very dramatic fantasy costume, and so does Colin. But Jacob's fantasy costume is kind of a joke referencing this, is basically just his hoodie again.
yeah, I think it's with a cape tied on, like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah.
like a sheet tied on as a cape.
He's really just in it to be counterculture in any way that he can, rather than like the classic reasons to be playing D&D.
And yeah, for any infants that are currently engaging with this, during the 80s and like early 90s and everything, there was kind of a satanic panic thing going on.
Right.
Gets it definitely revolved a lot around like homophobia and queer issues as well, but like there was also a corner of it where it was very focused on specifically tabletop gaming, mainly Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. Were both like I was in elementary school in like the mid 90s, and there were still parents who like would not let kids interact with me, like their children interact with me because I played Magic the Gathering, and they were worried I was a witch that would summon demons and possess them. So it was like a
Only if you have the
weird
right
like as
cards.
yeah, oh, no, that's Yu-Gi-Oh. But as the yeah, it's one of those like in that era, even though it was a pretty like nerdy thing and like it did have that like kind of basement dweller association and everything, it also was a kind of like weird counterculture and something that like conservative America at the time was very like pearl clutchy over.
I think there
Um,
was one case and I don't actually know the history very well, so this could be entirely apocryphal. But there was like one case where some kid like committed suicide, and they found out that he had been in D&D, and there was like it was blown up into this like they think they're really their characters, and if the character dies, they have to kill themselves, and it's a cult where they're obsessed with these demons and like dark fantasy and
It was that like Momo thing, but for boomers.
yeah.
Like the like weird chicken lady thing where like everyone was in a panic over a couple years back. Yeah, no, except yeah, Dungeons and Dragons. So yeah, there's definitely a little bit like a few kind of references to that, like making them outsiders more than it being like a nerdy thing. But yeah, that might be a little lost on people who are kind of used to it being like really common. Like everyone's got a podcast where they're just playing D&D and recording themselves, and stuff like that.
There's a line we have about that in the assembly scene early on, where one of the dialogue choices is Alicia says like, do they they're asking why were we brought into this assembly, and one of the dialogue choices is, do they think we're doing devil stuff? And
Right.
Colin says, God, I've explained to my mom 1,000 times. It's a tactical storytelling board game, not devil stuff.
Yeah, it's like
I love
that, and then all the new wave music club references are probably like the most dated references that we make. Like we tried to make it kind of a like it's about like modern internet culture, but just not set in the internet kind of game. But yeah, there's definitely I think those two big things. If you don't know the context for them, might have gone over some heads.
Shout out to our writer Mike, who wrote all the new wave music references, because he is a gigantic music nerd and he wrote them all without any reference. Like he just knew off the top of his head who the lead singers were for every band. Wait, not true?
I don't think that's true. I think he did do some research. He does know a lot of music nerd stuff, though.
But if you're saving anything for transcripts, make sure you say he had the uncanny ability to have all those references in his head. I think that sounds cooler.
It's in the written transcripts now.
Excellent.
So let's
Get
dive
rid
into
of the rest of that.
dive into the final character here that you have in your press kit, which is the principal. Who is this?
Gary Gygax?
No, it's Gary Gygax's friend, basically.
There's a very deep bit of lore explaining that he knows Gary Gygax.
Yeah. Should we start by explaining Mustache Adult? So like originally this character, this is one of the characters that actually changed design, because like Colin, Alicia, and Jacob were built at the beginning by the artist, and like Mike and I inherited them and we just used them. And there was a principal character originally in that one too, but he was kind of like this much bigger guy with like a big fancy mustache. And we the original idea was he was going to be a beatnik, because the original plot of the story was that like beatniks were going to be sucking out like the life energy from the students, because there was this whole weird in beatnik culture, there was this like weird concept of like psychic energy that they had. Ryan's giving me this like what the
This is
fuck?
very new to me.
Yeah, this was like
Wow.
Orgone
very
accumulator.
yeah very
Google Orgone accumulator.
I would have probably hesitated a lot more to join this game.
Yeah,
if that had been the story when I applied.
Orgone energy. Yeah, so he was going to be like this ex beatnik who is siphoning orgone energy from the students. And we did actually go pretty far down the like researching beatnik culture like rabbit hole. And then the story changed to like actually being about internet culture, and we're like, all right, we got to do something different for Principal Enfield. So instead of being a burnt out beatnik or like a current beatnik, he became this like burnt out hippie who had been like all about the like peace and love movement back in the 60s, but like now it's the 80s and he's got a real job, and he's like he's had kind of a rough time. He had a falling out. He was part of the spoilers again, a part of the original group that invented the tabletop game C&C, but due to various reasons they had a falling out, and so he's like not part of that anymore. And he's based on a number of things, but one of them is the Buddy Christ from the Dogma movie, who's like, "Hey." um so he does that pose whenever he's like trying to be like upbeat and positive about things, like, "Hey, this tournament's about positive vibes and togetherness and like show your school spirit."
But it's very
um
thin. It's very skin deep, that part of him.
That
Yep.
that specific part, because I've noticed that as I've been playing, he's like, yeah, this is going to be super fun, and all the peace signs are flowing out of him, and I get this really strong Danganronpa feel, where it's like, no, what you're saying is terrible. Your gestures do not justify what you're saying. This is not good. And I love that kind of juxtaposition of what he's saying and what he's doing.
That conflict and that kind of weirdness, and like the way that kind of unsettles people who first engage with it and just doesn't make sense from a writing way. It's kind of like the way people get led into the mystery. You know, it's like it's almost like one thing I really appreciate about kind of like the way this story leads into the mystery is I feel like some of the best kind of like mystery stories, or ones where like the premise kind of slowly unravels in the background, is they start by just introducing, like, imagine like a plank of wood where someone has like created a little splinter that is just sticking out, and like the player is just like running their hand over it over and over again, and it's perfectly smooth normally, except for this one little splinter that just like feels wrong when you're touching it and stuff, and like that entices them to start digging at it and eventually like pulling that apart and finding what's underneath and everything. And yeah, so it's interesting seeing people kind of evolve from like, why is this guy like this, and like this doesn't make sense, to as like they learn more important things throughout the storyline.
yeah, the principal has his own motivations. Like he's trying to put a happy face on some things, but like his his brain space is deep and mysterious for most of the game.
And yeah, if you've been a student for a like an underfunded kind of academic department or something, and you have someone who really genuinely cares at like the head of that department constantly having to let you down in that kind of desperation as he's like delivering bad news but not wanting like the students to revolt, like he definitely kind of has those vibes a lot of the time. um like he doesn't really necessarily want to be doing this to everybody,
Yeah,
but he's just
and
trying to put on a happy face.
he like moves the Spirit Week up 6 months in the calendar to try and have like a positive school vibes event to cheer
But
everybody up.
it accidentally just becomes very dystopian because everyone has to like make propaganda posters about how you don't really need clubs and it's actually okay that this is happening.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, that kind of like eeriness and juxtaposition was one of the like the few places where it kind of broke away from like the comfort that the game tries to like really drive home. But in order to like create something that stood out and drew people kind of deeper into like the mystery.
yeah.
Um,
If it's not clear by now, Mike and I are very big on absurdism
Hmm.
as sort of, a sense of humor. And so basically, like, one of our most common strategies in our writing was like to take a semi-realistic thing and then just like turn the volume all the way up on it, like way too much, until it became super ridiculous.
So speaking of close to reality, we got the three main characters also have these in-game characters. So you want to talk a little about these?
Sure. Yeah, so this is Anjaya, who is Alicia's mage character. I feel like Ryan should talk the most about the in-game characters because they're more characterized by their mechanics than they are by their dialogue for the most part.
Sounds good. Yeah, no, the in-game characters were a really interesting challenge as a combat designer, because it wasn't just, I need to check off boxes for certain roles or represent certain mechanics. The characters had to not only, fill those roles and fit together as a team, which there ends up being 7 total characters, um, but you can run 3 at a time. But yeah, in addition to just filling the roles that a normal party of characters normally has to, they also have to each kind of feel like that character's personality and fit into the character that's represented in the story. So it doesn't feel weird that like they really change up their personality when they go into the CNC, especially since like so much of the story revolves around um, Alicia trying to like meet people where they are and create characters in a story that make them feel comfortable joining CNC, which is actually, a source of a big conflict with her and Colin because he's the big rules lawyer. And there's a few lines of dialogue that Colin has that are literally just lifted from like me complaining about shit in chat. And oh wait, sorry. I I did a swear.
That's perfectly fine.
Okay. uh, bad habit from working in salty workplaces. But the yeah, so like I think one of my favorite ones bits of dialogue was like the last character that you recruit. He like is a member of the basically the furry club, and his character is a specific kind of fruit bat, and a very specific kind according to the writers. So I initially, when I was pitched this character and had to come up with someone that like matched that personality, I was like, oh, cool, yeah, I guess like there's a few options we have. We could do like a like kind of vampiric like tank, but it has to be high aggression sort of character with like blood draining attacks. And they're like, oh no, this is a fruit bat. Only eats fruit.
Yeah, well, I thought it was funny because you were like, well, like it makes sense to do like vampirism or like echo because we're trying to come
Yeah.
up with a flying character, and we were like, well, we don't want to do bird, so what about bat? And you kept like coming up with cool bat mechanics, and I'm like,
Sonic attacks, like
Yeah.
I had a whole echolocation kind of like
And I
mark
was
your
like,
target system.
wouldn't it be funnier if we picked a bat that like can't do any traditional bat things?
None of the normal game design tropes for bats, like so no sonic attacks, and like in game they actually have this back and forth when they're trying to come up with this character. And then like so they gave me the specific name. Oh yeah, so I mentioned echolocation, and the bat is not blind, sees perfectly fine. And then there was so I basically like looked up like the bat like breed on Wikipedia, and like the main thing it was known for was it eating fruit and then shitting out the seeds for
It
pollination.
fertilizes the soil with its poop.
And there's a whole thing of like their like main socialization was oral sex, which like obviously not a good fit for this game, and I didn't even want to like attempt to make combat mechanics around that. So and then sometimes they bite people and give them the plague.
So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a kind of like plague bite melee mechanic. Ended up being, since it was the 7th character, I kind of had 3 characters that focused on physical damage, 3 on magical damage, and then this was kind of the character that could fit into all of your existing kits because you had so few battles to like work with them. I wanted to make that character basically a viable option regardless of what you were doing at that point. So it's a very flexible character. Ended up being kind of a summoner druid character with high mobility. But yeah, there's a full-on dialogue back and forth where Duncan is excitedly explaining bat facts
All right,
to
talk
Colin,
about
who is upset. But yes,
talk about Anjaya and how Anjaya's mechanics work.
Yeah. So anyway, Anjaya is rad. Anjaya's she's kind of like being the main protagonist character. I wanted her to have the like the flashiest kind of marquee mechanic, which in this game is chain lightning effects. There's a bunch of mechanics that revolve around chaining, and the biggest thing for Anjaya is she's a very supportive kind of leader. She's the kind of manager that would make sure that everyone on her team shines way more than trying to like be domineering over them or be the person that like gets the spotlight. So her main mechanic is she's kind of like the glass cannon ranged AoE character or area of effect attack character. But she needs other characters to kind of support her and line up attacks to really shine the most. And I felt that was like she also is with her upgrades. She's the one that gets a lot of abilities that give you additional tactics points or give buffs to other characters. So she's very good at encouraging other players and the like.
Oh, and officially, she's a mage. Like the D&D 1E classes were mage, warrior, and rogue. So the three main characters are a mage, a warrior, and a rogue.
Yeah, and
Even though we kind of fudged Colin's class, he's like some kind of weird hybrid between a paladin and a barbarian. But
you know,
that's
Yeah.
warrior. It's slightly different in C&C. C&C is like
yeah.
mirror universe D&D.
So yeah, there's like the magical girl, there's the punchy boy, and then there's the tricksy one. Um, as like the generic archetypes, and then the other characters were kind of elaborations on each of the previous characters.
Yeah.
But
And I gotta say, chain lightning is my favorite mechanic to use in the game. Like every time I had to do like playthrough stuff, it's all about like, let's see how much of the battlefield we can connect into one single contiguous chain so I can get everybody at once with chain lightning. It's
I,
just
there
kind
was
of feels good to use.
I was having a lot of fun with that mechanic as well, just to use the grappling hook. So early on in the game, when you get the grappling hook, and just started using that and making sure that I pushed and pulled people into small piles, so I could use the chain mechanic there, the chain lightning mechanic. It just feels so good just to nuke a ton of enemies at the same time.
my original background, like being heavily in like designing mechanics for puzzle games and like different puzzles, meant that because this game was fully deterministic, and we didn't have any randomness and everything, we a lot of the battles were just naturally going to have a puzzle like solution and everything, and I wanted one of our core and really like obvious mechanics to feel like this kind of emergent puzzle that you got to play around with depending on like the team comp that you set up. Like, are you using the Psychomancer class that comes along later that actually creates mist that conducts the electricity and connects, groups of enemies, or like you using like the grappling hook or the shove reposition stuff. Yeah, Rougey's, whole personality, he really likes throwing wrenches in other people's plans, disrupting things and everything. So I went with a heavy like reposition focus for his kit. And I believe chaining came out of like a conversation at GDC with Into the Breach dev, where like the main like really great advice and takeaway I got from that was um, having kind of like a flashy and fun mechanic that gives people like goals to work towards, like that are apart from just grind your opponent's health to nothing, is something that feels very, very good. And I was definitely like chaining use was always in the game and everything, but it was very sparingly used. It was like I was very afraid of it because of how powerful it seems, and I was afraid of making something seem too good. And there's definitely a point where it's just like, but it's fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And like ultimately, like with like certain enemy types and a few more things that we added into the game, like the magical versus physical damage and everything, made chaining a lot more fair, and a lot of the other stuff a lot more viable. But yeah, it ended up being pretty okay that, there's a very obvious and loud kind of keyword mechanic that makes people feel good about building around. Especially since this was meant as like a kind of introduction to the genre. I really wanted players to kind of understand what is really fun for me with this kind of genre, but on a very like boiled down and very kind of obvious level. But yeah,
I want to dive
that's
into
Anjaya.
the other two focused characters here as well. So this is Colin's persona.
Um, yeah, so he's kind of like big tank character. He has the best stats to reflect his min-maxy rules lawyer nature, and because he was kind of a villain, I kind of let Eodwald,
His name is Eodwald because it's
Eodwald.
very
There you go.
fantasy-ish. It's
Yeah.
something Tolkien would have been proud of.
Yeah, it's old
Um,
Englishy.
I let him kind of eat being the like boring but like very easy to use kind of like supportive tank character. Um, it's he's probably the hardest to lose fights with, but probably one of the worst for like he has the lowest ceiling as far as like what he can pull off and everything. And like, yeah, overall mechanically, he kind of ended up not being super popular from feedback I got, but like I was pretty okay with that because like he also like story wise, a lot of people just didn't like using him because they thought he was a jerk. And if there was, he does fill a very important role. Like he has a lot of really great supportive abilities
Hmm.
that are heavily designed around if a player is struggling with certain concepts that are difficult in our core system, like the way enemies target other people. If you paid close attention to that, you can just through positioning completely avoid getting hit in most battles if you're smart about your positioning, or take out the right enemy and then create the safe spot. um, Eodwald kind of makes up for if you don't know how to do that well, or you find yourself cornered and everything, by being able to taunt enemies or to hit them with a crowd control effect that reduces the damage they deal. Um, so yeah, so he kind of his main role was kind of being kind of like the rock the high stats character, and the one that wins battles basically no matter what, just to like kind of reflect who he would be as a C&C player.
He also,
um
like, as a character, he thinks about himself as like the leader who takes care of the rest of the club and protects them, and like,
yeah,
stands up to bullies and doesn't, get rattled by them and stuff. So that's kind of reflected in, he's this stoic paladin character that can taunt damage away from the rest of the party and take it on himself, and, sort of martyr himself,
yeah, he can take
which
the hit.
fits into his arc.
And yeah, he also is one of the only characters that just starts with like flat physical armor.
Hmm.
So like the physical attacks hitting him actually do, you know, end up being less efficient than if they were hitting any other player. In addition to him just being meatier, health wise.
So
Yeah,
our final our third character here, Jacob,
yeah.
Yeah,
or
Rogie the
Rogue.
Rogue.
What what's his full name again?
Robespierre Trotsky Guevara.
I love it.
Yeah, Rogie, or as one article about Wintermoor erroneously put it, it's pronounced Rogue Guy, which it's not pronounced Rogue Guy, but
You gotta love when people speak on like with authority about your game and are just like very wrong.
yeah, Rogie, you can tell from Rogie's attire that like he's not. Jacob doesn't take the game like super seriously.
He has a bandana. He has a little um, what do you call it? Cape.
Cape.
Yep, cape-ish. And yeah, his outfit is done.
Yeah. But like mechanically, I already mentioned, he really likes disrupting plans, like mixing things up and everything. And then also kind of as a C&C player, focused him a bit on like how I am when I'm a player and not a DM, which is you'd think I'd have more empathy for DMs, because that was like the first role I kind of did when I was like playing it in high school. But nah, as a player, I'm like a huge troll. Just a problem. I'm usually like I pick my abilities based on what's going to create weird emergent situations and everything. So he's the kind of character who would demand a grappling hook and then find all sorts of annoying ways to use it that make like the DM like have to like rub their temples and be like, no, yeah, that works.
Yeah,
And
and
like
Colin
like the
Colin puts up with it because he's known Jacob for like years and years and years, but he's not like thrilled with it.
and kind of how that's reflected in gameplay is he has a lot of stuff where he lines up like really perfect moments with his reposition mechanics and everything. And he's definitely got some of the most flexible abilities, because all of his reposition mechanics can also target friendlies without dealing damage to them. So he has the ability to pull Anjaya out of danger, or even across little rivers, which forces enemies to path across like large areas. Um, and yeah, so making people feel clever and also like they're kind of getting one over on the game and potentially even like cheesing the game was actually part of Roby's character, because how he would actually play, C&C as a person.
Yeah. Also,
Um,
Jacob loves like action movies. He's very into like big, showy, dramatic, flashy kind of action. And so this is, that character sort of reflects that showiness in he just wants the thing that will make his that will seem cool in the moment. I think there's an upgrade that you can get him for Christmas that's like background music that like plays when he makes an entrance. And
That's
um
fantastic.
and one of the other characters is like, it's maybe not the best idea for the rogue to have like showy background music when they enter a room. And Jacob's like, I'll make it work. It's fine.
Zero
and
sneak.
people were so upset, like especially hardcore tactics players at like cons were very, very upset that he did not deal additional damage from attacking enemies from behind due to facing
That was an
direction.
early mechanic, actually. The attack from behind. Yeah,
Yeah.
we discovered
And
that.
like, oh yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
here.
I mean, yeah, it's that was one of the major like kind of genre conventions because like facing direction and is like an element of positioning that's very common in turn-based tactics games. Final Fantasy Tactics, like like a lot of games care if someone is facing the other way for like chance to hit or like chance to crit, getting bonuses and everything, and especially the rogue character. um, but he ended up kind of like focusing more on like rogues being flexible jack of all trades kind of characters and very like having a lot of situational tools for specific situations that I think honestly is a lot more accurate to what D&D or C&C rogues would do than like just sneak and sneak attack, apart from like that is a way they deal damage and everything. But it's like it was something that we did intentionally drop knowing it would be controversial because it didn't really contribute to the actual enjoyment of the genre, and it adds a lot of rules baggage, which would be good if we were trying to create a much longer game that needed more
More
content and
hardcore game.
yeah, or a more hardcore game. But like for this game, it didn't need the extra upgrades. It didn't need the nuance. It already had plenty of mechanics, and it was just like a lot of weird invisible rules. And that was also another big thing we wanted to avoid. Ben had an immediate like from the get go, like you should be able to look at the board and like have an idea of what is going on, kind of rule. Um,
I
Took
was
that from Into the Breach, actually. Into the Breach has an amazing thing, which is you can post a screenshot of Into the Breach on your forums and be like, help, how do I solve this? And no information is needed about the screenshot. The screenshot contains everything you need to know. And we were aiming for that with the game. And I really liked the idea of a game being that simple. I think Into the Breach is an amazingly designed game because of its simplicity. And I felt like facing was just, it added too much complexity for its worth. And so even though we had facing implemented in the game and showed it off at some early demo builds, yeah, we just axed the whole system.
reading through some of the documents that you sent over prior to the conversation here, and just as you noted there, simplicity was key. Um, and is that because of the demographic that you wanted to target for this? So it would be an easy tactics game to get into for new players, or what was the um, what was the motivation for the easiness instead of the grindiness?
I'd hesitate on the word easy.
Easy to
Going back to
understand,
the
not easy to master.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
you try Yin's mastery challenge and get back to me on easy. I streamed myself doing that and I wiped on that 5 times because I refused to use the like build that I cheesed the fight with, and I then discovered like, oh no, I made this very hard. It's the hardest optional battle in the game, so whatever. But
No,
But I do think
yeah.
a lot of people. Oh, I do think a lot of people, when they hear the phrase tactics RPG, the thing that comes immediately to mind is like Final Fantasy Tactics and these sort of very dense rule books that require discussing on game FAQs to understand like even what the possibility space is. And I was trying to move away from that in part because I think like simpler is more aesthetically pleasing. And I look at a game like Into the Breach and I just see a very aesthetically pleasing game that would give me pleasure to mimic. But also, we knew fairly early on that we were targeting kind of the joke phrase to describe them internally was Tumblr teens, 13-year-olds who are very interested in like video games and nerd stuff, and also social justice and maybe hanging out on Tumblr. I'm sure you're familiar with this like concept.
Cozy cottagecore stuff on Tumblr, and is it soft punk or kind punk? That was the term for that was circulating Tumblr for a while. Of like, no, it's actually like really badass to like be supportive of your friends and like have a positive
Uh,
attitude.
to to use more clinical and less potentially condescending terms, it was the visual novel crowd and people that were getting into those games and kind of propping up that whole scene. Um,
I want to be clear, by the way, that
was our main.
I am one
Yeah.
of those Tumblr teens, so I say this only with love.
Yeah,
But
but it was mostly, yeah, at least like my impression was the visual novel crowd was the main focus for this game, and we wanted to kind of make a game that was very welcoming to them and that kind of showed them what was fun about, games that go a bit deeper with like combat and mechanics and everything, and like those RPGs, so they could potentially, it was kind of like like a gateway game, to
Mhm.
like get people used to some of these mechanics or where the joy can be found, because I feel sometimes, especially with all the rules and like upfront, barriers to entry, it can be difficult to see what's even enjoyable or to find the fun in those games.
and we were
Um,
also making a game about how to not alienate people from your hobby, right? Like
yeah,
it,
so we didn't want the gameplay to like alienate people from the
it was
story.
we wanted to make a game where like if you came for the story because you love visual novels and you want to be empathetic and connect with these characters, the game mechanics shouldn't stop you from achieving that goal, right? It shouldn't be just like this is really hard and if you can't do it, too bad you're not good enough to play the game, right? Like that's a very harsh thing. And so we even implemented a system whereby like if you lose a fight twice, there's a no fail mode and there's like no punishment for choosing it. You can just say I want to put on a mode where my characters can't die so I can just continue with the story.
I will note that as the combat designer internally, I was very salty about this at first and was very wrong. Just ultimately, like I will like there it very consistently like have been proven wrong, because it turns out you just don't use it
Yeah.
if you want to
Yeah, the
like
people
yeah
who really care about the mechanics and want to do it don't turn on no fail.
yeah
The people who are like, this is stressing me out too much. I just want to see what comes next. Turn on no fail, and everyone's happy. As
yeah,
it
and like even the people that I like saw playing it with like no fail and everything, and even like really cranked up like player health, that like really cranked down enemy health so they're killing everything in one hit and stuff like that, like they were still really enjoying specific combat mechanics, which is all I really cared about, is that like people would find their team and like enjoy how they played off each other. So it
It
was
might
definitely
be
like, yeah. Oh, yep.
it might be worth mentioning Undertale too, as like for the audience. We were targeting the exact same audience as Undertale. We were trying to do kind of, you know, what Undertale did, except I mean, I don't think people consider Undertale a shmup, although Undertale was like a shmup also, but we were trying to take a lot of the Undertale concepts and apply them to tactics RPGs,
Although
which
I
I
would
think
say
many of us just
I
loved.
do know people who have been alienated by Undertale because it was too hard. Right? Who went
Hmm.
like I am like an entire beginner to this genre and the storytelling is really cool and cute, but I can't do this mechanic and I can't finish the game. And like that's so sad because it's such a wonderful game. It's like no, we play the we want you to see the whole story. The point is for you to see the whole story.
There
We did have a requirement no real time behaviors. Everything can be done with infinite waiting in order to like make it easier for those folks.
and yeah, there's
I
definitely
like
an
that.
element of just like, yeah, kind of like walking so hopefully other games can run, or like, yeah, like bringing people in and being willing to cut out like a lot of mechanical cruft and everything, specifically so like once someone has played Wintermoor, maybe they'll be more willing to, engage a bit more with like other games that they
Yeah.
might have been intimidated by before.
Yeah, so it's
um,
like let's pick out what are the most fun core things about tactics, right? It's like finding a build that you feel like that feels good and fun and like powerful to use. And it's feeling clever because you did some movements that like messed with the enemy AI and like got you an extra turn that you weren't supposed to have. And like these little pieces, and like let's make the game just about those like good feeling things and not about weapon triangles and facing and like permadeath on characters and like all the other stuff that comes like with the hardcore end of the genre.
And there's still like elements of like strategy and especially teamwork, since so much of the game is about characters connecting. So like almost every status effect is designed not to benefit whoever uses it, but to benefit another character. So like the order in which you do things. So there starts to be, the options to do a lot more complex stuff and get those like fiddlier like little interactions and everything. But at the bare minimum, we wanted the floor and the barriers to entry to be as low as possible, while still giving some room for like an interesting ceiling, with stuff like chaining or like vulnerability and the armor effects.
So I'm flipping through
That
some
was
of the.
one of our great mini games.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's my favorite thing to watch people stream is when they realize that they have to draw. They're being called upon to draw a picture of a horse. That's hands down the best reaction that we get to any moment in the game, where people go, "Wait, I have to draw this?" And then they proceed. And so many people have made so many like wonderful little weird drawings in our little drawing mini game. I love it so much.
And yeah, as far as like just little bits of gameplay and story that like paid off really, really well. This is another one similar to like the graffiti moment where like the player does something and it's like a throwaway thing early on and they don't think they're ever going to see it again. And then it keeps coming up like various like there's a couple moments where the different drawings that you did actually get used in the like story and like main world and everything.
Yeah, I will
That's always
give
a great
credit
gag.
to our artist Leo for pretty much everything in this screenshot, like the weird funky sticker designs, the strange names on the markers, which are called Thick Boy and Marky Chan, and the eraser is Mr. Mistake. And I think all of those are amazing jokes, and Leo I believe came up with all of those. So
That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm showing some of the screenshots that we have here from the game, and I gotta say I really like this part here when you finish a fight, and you can see I do enjoy the par functionality here, and that you can actually you can be a lot better than par, and then you are, what is it, super stupendous something, I can't remember what the phrase.
staggeringly super savvy.
There we go. There we go.
Triple S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Japanese letter grading.
that is so
We
smart.
took it from Devil May Cry pretty directly.
I love it.
Yeah, I think we changed the names of the actual words that they use, but yeah. Yeah, and this is another example of that like low floor, high ceiling mentality, right? Where it's like you just have to win the fight to win the fight, right? Like you just have to, usually the goal is like defeat all the enemies. And like that's usually not crazy hard, but if you want to get the triple S rank, you got to think about the moves you're doing and like which characters you're using. And
Yeah,
that gets harder and harder.
this system actually is very, very heavily driven by a like score systems from bubble shooters, actually. Which were like bubble shooters were like pretty simple, like fairly like easy or like random number generated focus puzzles to like clear. But there was a lot of weird subtle mechanics where you could optimize score, and that was kind of where we put in like high level play. uh it never really like those systems never really got used in a way that was very satisfying to me when I was working for like bigger companies, everything. So with this one, the metal system was very much set to be like, if you figure out this combat and you play it optimally and you actually like treat it, as a hardcore tactics game, because that's like what you get out of these games, then there is a space where you'll be graded based on that. And those medals also unlock a lot of the abilities that I wouldn't really want to introduce to players who are uncomfortable with the genre,
Mm-hmm,
but
mm-hmm.
will kind of satisfy a lot of players who are like, oh, I wanted more from this game. One big example is most of the kind of consumable mechanics, which is there's a whole set of power word abilities that happen. You can use once per battle. They give a buff for a few turns and everything. And those are very advanced mechanics compared to many of the other base mechanics that you run into while playing through the game normally. But if you're playing very well, you'll get access to the challenge battles sooner because those are unlocked by getting a certain number of medals. And then those challenge battles tend to unlock stuff that is harder to use, but more focused on the ceiling as opposed to the floor for the game. And I think that was a very good kind of compromise with like creating a space for people who love the story and everything, but they've played a lot of tactics games before, and they do kind of need a bit more meat with their character customization later on.
Yeah, we had this ethos that we tried to work in when we were thinking about our audience, right? Which is like some people will be coming to this for the tactics, for the gameplay, and some people will be coming to this for the story. And as a player, you should be allowed to choose why what you like about the game. So if you are good at the tactics and you enjoy doing the tactics, you are rewarded with more tactics, with harder battles, with like more complex mechanics. If what you like is the story and you want to go around and talk to people, you are rewarded with more people to talk to and easier combat, right? Like you get abilities and upgrades that like make it easier for you to just get through the fights. And so it's like, the people who like the story can focus on like getting through the story and reading the story, and the people who like the tactics can focus on the tactics, and people who want to do everything can do everything.
And the specifically the theming for the for the upgrades that you would get from story-oriented stuff was, as Kyla mentioned earlier, really focused on like those two characters working together in a very obvious way. Like it would be very much like this makes you better with this specific character, and
You just connected with.
yeah, exactly. And then the challenge battle upgrades and stuff like that, those tended to be a bit more just like mechanical and dry and kind of like fantasy themed upgrades and stuff, because like those were meant for the people who were looking at the rules text and getting excited by that. Whereas the story oriented stuff had little jokes in the flavor text, and a lot of like the theming was based on the character that you got it from. So the I guess kind of the place where the two bled into each other was, not only did we want to like kind of reward people with more of what they like about the game, but we also kind of wanted the other half of the game not to get in the way, but kind of make a case for itself. Like kind of with the upgrades you get through the side quests and stuff like that, kind of entice game like combat oriented players to engage with the story more rather than just rushing through stuff. And with a lot of the combat upgrades, kind of entice the story oriented players to enjoy the combos and stuff like that.
Can I tell a short tangential story?
Go for it.
About the writing? So Ryan, you mentioned the flavor text on the attacks. I was just thinking like yesterday about the fact that like, man, we wrote those in like the worst possible like Mike and I wrote a lot of the attack flavor stuff, or like finished up a lot of the attack flavor text when we were in an airport on the way to reboot Red. And like, so it was in Canada, and we were going to be landing in Canada at like 1 a.m. and then still had to take like a multi-hour like bus ride to the place we were staying for this conference. And so it was like 9 or 10 p.m. We were sitting in the airport, and I had a horrible head cold. So if some of the jokes in the flavor text for like the attacks and when upgrades seem a little weird, we were a little loopy when we wrote some of that.
Awesome. So I'm looking through some of the screenshots here. So I really like this one, as it kind of shows how, again, going back to planning and the way that you can plan your attacks and making sure that you have a lot of fun with the tactics element as well. Utilizing all the different skills that your characters have. I've been playing a few other tactics games. I'm not a tactics gamer, but this one, as I said before, it was easy to understand, which I really enjoyed. But again, not easy to master as I am progressing through the story, and I realize that there are a lot of nuances here that I don't know about yet. So it's going to be super fun to continue to progress through the story here. So I would like to move on a bit and talk about the reception of the game when it comes to your attendance around the world, around the globe at conferences, and what the reception was there, and then talk a bit about your the reception when the game launched. But let's start with conferences. What did people say?
Did we ever go anywhere more global than Canada? I think we mostly just stayed in the U.S.
Canada is the farthest we got, which is still pretty decent.
Hey,
Oh,
hey, you went international.
yeah, we were at the Reboot Red conference that was held in, what is the name of that town? I don't know. It was at a very fancy hotel.
Banff,
Like the fanciest
Banff.
Banff, yes, in the town of Banff, Canada, in the fanciest hotel I have ever been in my life.
Very cool.
Yeah, showing to cons is difficult because, especially, we were a cozy game, and cozy is a great feeling that everyone wants to feel, but is not a feeling that is easy to import into a PAX like somewhere where there's 200 different booths all vying for your attention and blaring music and techno is in the background. So, although we actually didn't take it to PAX, our very first demo, as I recall, had the characters talking to you, breaking the fourth wall, and saying, "Look, this is a demo. Are you more interested in combat or story?" And then we teleported you to like a 15-minute, take of whichever one you selected, which is actually a great idea, I thought, and a good way to solve that. By the time we did PAX, we realized that if we give people a half-hour demo, our game was actually sticky enough that they would play for the full half hour. So we gave them both of it. We gave them a little taste of both, and they got to play the game for longer.
Yeah, it's tough to demo narrative games as well in a con setting because the we try and get to the point of the story as quickly as possible, but it's still like kind of pushing 30 to maybe 45 minutes depending on how you play to really get to the point where we've established what's going on. So I think our original demo was like chat, or not our original demo, but like the demo we ended up doing at a lot of PAXs was like from the beginning of the first chapter to the moment you meet your first snowball tournament opponents, and you like talk to the young monarchists is the first club. Um, and that's a chunk of time, and we were lucky that like most people who played the demo like wanted to play through the whole thing and would play through to the end, which was like is a great compliment on the game. But it also means you don't get a ton of throughput at a convention, right? There aren't that many people who can play because one playthrough takes a long time. Um, so we were very helped by having like high screens that people could stand in the back and like watch the gameplay happen. Or I think it didn't at like PAX East you guys went to when you had the Versus Evil booth, right? You had a lot more stations than our like single computer or two computers or whatever it was at it was single
Yep.
computer and TV at the Indie Mega booth.
And we had people sit in beanbags super low to the ground so that people could see what was happening above their heads.
Oh, that's cool.
It
But yeah,
it
even
very much helped us a lot. That we had like a very visual, like the art style was just incredible for this game. So we had a very visually appealing game. And that definitely got a lot of people very interested, even if they didn't have time to like play, the story to kind of get a feel for like the writer's voice, or like our demo, RPGs, you want to slow roll mechanics and everything. So like the demo is just teaching you the very basics, which doesn't really get into what's actually like special or any nuance or anything.
Yeah, and you
So
kind of, I think you have to play the first 3 chapters of the game to actually have seen all the mechanics in the game at least once, pretty much, not including the like fancy boss fight stuff at the very end.
it turns out pretty games demo very, very well at cons,
Yeah,
even if they're a genre that normally would suffer in that
yeah.
environment.
Also,
Um,
we got an unexpected boon from COVID at the last minute. I think it was because
did
of
we?
COVID. Maybe it wasn't because of COVID, but it was because of something. Maybe it was just random happenstance. But you guys demoed at PAX East, and we have a publisher there, and the publisher was going to show our game on like 2 screens at their booth because they have like 6 games that they're showing. And then like one of the biggest games that was like supposed to come from the UK sort of pulled out at the last minute, like they couldn't make it. So we got all their booth space. So we had
Oh
like
yeah, it was right
8
before everything
stations or
shut
something
down.
like that. Yeah, and it was right before everything shut down due to COVID. So
That was great. Yeah, we were, part of our publishers. Publishers have a difficult job, and we were part of their release slot. And they release 3 games a year, and we were one of the games that year who therefore got to show at PAX. And the other 2 games that we're going to release both didn't have their demo ready in time. They just had production problems.
Oh,
And so the publisher's question became, should we just cancel our entire PAX presence, or should we give it all to Wintermoor Tactics Club? And our response was, give it all to us right now. And it worked.
Kind of the flip side of that coin, though, is like basically like when we launched and when we were on new platforms and everything, every conference was gone, and that is there's so much press that is like
Mhm.
very difficult to reach out to, so much marketing opportunities. Like it's conferences aren't everything, but it is usually a pretty good space to like get your finished game in front of the kind of people that would advocate for it. So and what like yeah, I have a hard time saying we got a boon from the plague.
yeah, and I guess no, I misremembered the timeline. That just
Yeah.
happened randomly because of the other games that we got a big booth. But we did manage to slide in. Like PAX East was like one of the last big conventions that happened before everything shut down for COVID. Because we were also supposed to do like Emerald City Comic Con, I think, that year, and like a few other things. And like, whoops, by the way, plague. And then it's like, well, we're releasing in May. We're not gonna just like, our team can't really afford to just, back up our release date for a year or more. So we just released in May and just did it digitally.
so can you tell me a bit more about how that went? The launch and everything. It was in the middle of COVID. Everyone was trying to get their hands on game consoles. The Switch was sold out everywhere, and you launch a game right in the middle of this. What what was the reception like?
Critically pretty
I
good.
remember, yeah, the best thing we had was great critical reception. There's a funny, I think this game kind of fell into being a common trope of like critically very well received, but not that many people purchase it. When I hear the description of a game that's critically well received, but not many people purchase it, I think of something like That Dragon Cancer, something of like, takes on difficult tasks and is very artistic, but a pain in the butt to play, I guess. Or Cart Life also did that. And I'm surprised that we fell into that category because I see us as being a very goofy thing that aims at being fun more than being, you know, capital A artistic. The
Yeah,
fact is, oh, sorry,
I think the best press we got was from the Buried Treasure article. That is it. He's one of the
John
former.
Walker,
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the former Kotaku writers. Is that right?
Rock
Or
Paper Shotgun.
Rock Paper
Oh,
Shotgun.
there
That's
we
right.
go.
Former Rock Paper Shotgun person. Um, yeah, runs a blog called Buried Treasure where like he just writes up like obscure indie games and gave us like a really glowing write up saying like I would be really surprised if this doesn't catch on because it's like very much in the zeitgeist right now. It was such a nice like sweet article and we absolutely didn't catch on. um
Mhm.
but we did, because of that article, we also made, he was responsible for compiling a list for Kotaku at the end of the year that was the
Mm.
top games of 2020 that you've never heard of, and he put us on that list. So and that also gave us like a little mini press boost, and was a really nice thing. And it's nice to think like we made somebody's top games of 2020 list. We weren't like
I mean, a few folks is,
yeah, we did get a few
yeah.
like I think we got like a best tactics RPG from like a one online magazine and some or something like that. But
That is pretty
It's
good
very
accolades.
difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult to figure out what makes something a commercial success because I think everyone dreams of releasing the next Minecraft and being able to throw $10 million towards your next game when your first game was an indie labor of love. And it is very, very difficult when looking at a game that is not yet released to identify whether or not it will be a commercial success.
yeah, and it's it's tough because I feel like most people who play our game really enjoy the game and are many are sort of surprised at how much they enjoy the game based on the feedback we get. But it didn't spread enough. We just didn't have enough reach to get heard of. Yeah, exactly. That looks like Septavia there. That would imply you're pretty far in the in the
That
game.
that is correct. That is correct. Yeah, I've been having a blast playing this.
And so, I think obviously we wish it had sold really well and made us a lot of money and funded our next game. But I'm glad that people like for me personally, who like has another job and doesn't have to have a financial stake in like this determines whether I eat or not. I'm more proud to have made a game. I'm happier to have made a game I'm proud of, right? That I feel like
Mhm.
said something and meant something, and I feel like we made a good game, and I feel good about the thing we released into the world. Like, to me, that's much more important. And I guess that's the indie life, right? Is that's the thing that you prioritize that instead of bubble shooters, and you
Hey now, I made
although
good. Snoopy Pop was a work of art.
I was
But
gonna say, as you pointed out, bubble shooters don't make money either. So
yeah, they don't make any money compared to the slot machines or match threes and everything, which is why I kept losing my job.
yeah.
But
The worst of both worlds.
I think
But
your statement there, Kyla, the passion statement ties back to what Ben kind of started this interview with as well. Going from a AAA studio to doing something that you really, really wanted to do, and yeah, it's a labor
And
of love.
God bless Ben, who basically bankrolled this whole project. I just want to say, like, we did get a publisher towards the end who got us money for like marketing and things like that, but none of this would have happened if Ben hadn't been like, I want to invest in doing a passion project with some friends, and like that's an amazing thing, amazing and scary thing to do. And so, respect.
So
It was scary.
I bet. I bet. So on that note, where do you all see the indie scene going within the next couple of years? What are you most excited about in uh, what kind of what kind of games do you envision we'll have here in a couple of years?
I can say I've been thrilled by the story of Valheim, and I assume, you've been playing Valheim, it's got like 5 million players right now, that it was, I want to say, 6 French non-professional devs who made it. That I love this idea of with early access and with sort of Twitch democratizing the idea of game marketing a little bit. You see more games being made that target exactly what gamers want to play. I think that's super healthy, and it's because like it is easier to make indie games now, and it is easier to make people aware of indie games. But kind of a dark flip side of the coin is so many indie games come out that the signal to noise ratio is absolutely insane, and many
you can
people are
absolutely
releasing.
make very good stuff that nobody hears about.
Yep. Anyhow, it's two sides of the same coin, and I don't know. It's just a change, and it's hard to call it either exclusively good or exclusively bad. But more people make games now.
I foresee, and this is maybe not exactly the future of the indie scene specifically, but I foresee a big expansion in the double A uh, genre, because I think we're starting to see, and this is a thing that my husband and I talk about and argue about all the time, but it seems like we're starting to see some cracks in the foundation at the AAA level, where the amount of money needed to make the the big AAA monsters is just not like, you can't make that back no matter how good your sales are, and you end up like having to rush it anyway, and you end up with like weird buggy messes that people hate you for releasing regardless, right? So I think hopefully, if they learn anything from these big failures, we're going to see a lot of the really big companies investing in a lot of smaller projects rather than like two or three giant big tent poles, just because it's safer. And
It's gonna
hopefully
be
that's hopefully that's good for the industry. Like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
it's gonna be PS2 era all over again. Hell yes.
right? Like,
As someone who really liked that era and thought that there was a lot of like very creative stuff coming out of PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 kind of scene, especially from a lot of those like mid-sized studios or small teams with a big bankroll from like a publisher or something. Like,
it's like instead
yeah.
of spending $300 million on a game, you could make 30 $10 million games, right?
And
Like,
Valheim is a great game to mention in this kind of like being very economical and smart about how you approach it, because the game scales insanely well. That game could have sold very, very poorly, and it would just be what it is, and it wouldn't need anything more. But because it sold super well, the game servers are decentralized. There's a lot of stuff that like they don't have like the issue that most MMOs have when they blow up, which is suddenly like, oh god, we have to support 10 times the number of people we're expecting on like our actual infrastructure that we own and have to manage, and we're spending all that time dealing with those fires instead of the game. uh Valheim, like the players are handling the server on their own end and everything, and like while there's definitely probably like a lot of scaling issues they still have to deal with, they were very smart about like where they put their focus, and very efficient with things. The whole game is proc gen. It's like 1 gig because it's all like lighting shader effects, but very cheap models and very few of
yeah.
them.
Yeah,
Just
I'm honestly
yeah.
kind of surprised and impressed at how well the early access model has been doing. Like Valheim and Hades both like, really blow up before they're done. Um Done, not that a game is ever done, but because there's so many drawbacks to doing early access, and there's so much antipathy towards game marketing, especially for like unfinished products, that it's surprising to me how many indie hits come out of early access stuff.
And
I think it's because early access gives you a chance to like really focus on what the gamer's like. Because I think early access games that don't have a Discord and actually listen to what their Discord users post and like give weekly updates and be like these come from the community, I think those early access games fail. And
yeah, you don't
the
hear
way
about those ones.
yeah, the way to use early access is to really like iterate on finding the thing that your players love and also turning them into people who will proselytize your game because they feel like they got to play game designer a little bit. Their suggestions made it in. I don't know. That definitely is a way that seems to be getting more popular to successfully make your game absolutely monster huge.
And honestly, I love the kind of like transparency with the process. I feel there's so many misunderstandings even today with like what game development is or what each job does and stuff like that. That like I love seeing so much more of game developers engaging with players and players approaching game developers with curiosity as opposed to like entitlement and stuff like that. Like they actually want to know about the process, and honestly because a lot of them want to do it themselves. And I think that's very cool. Like as far as like the indie scene goes, I mean I'm still working on indie games, so I hope it's gonna be okay by the time I ship my next game. But I'm also very excited for like I feel there's a lot of very good talent that has been coming up, especially out of modding spaces and hobby spaces, that had access to a lot of tools and engines and everything along those and like resources online that like many developers who are professionals now did not have when they're growing up. So I could definitely see there being, I don't know about like everybody, being successful or anything, but I could see an explosion of extremely high quality work and extremely interesting games coming out over the next decade. Just as a lot more of those, like already I'm starting to see a lot of like the younger indies that we were showing with, just coming out with some just very interesting stuff that does give me a lot of those like PlayStation era vibes that
I love it
I
when people do weird
really miss.
experimental stuff because they can. Like, that's my favorite thing about indie games, is that it doesn't have to be bubble shooters and halos. Right? Is that people are like, I had this weird idea and I really wanted to try it and see if it works. And I hope that like people who do take risks like continue to be able to find a place to thrive, because it's not easy.
And along those lines, definitely random shout out to the Calico team, I think they showed at Indie Mega Booth with us a couple times.
Yeah.
Um, as like that team definitely seems like people to watch. As far as like examples of like just very like talented people that are bringing a lot of like really interesting ideas to like what games even are or should be to the table. It has a just like very emergent kind of playground aspect to it, and it's really great seeing players actually engage with a lot more games, kind of like Valheim and everything, that invite you to create a fun space to play yourself within their world. And like the world is conducive to certain things, but ultimately it's like players being very self-directed and curious about games, which I think as creatives gives us a lot more space to work, so we don't have to make something that directly appeals to what they're already expecting. And because, yeah, in addition to there being more creative devs entering the scene, I think there's going to be more creative players. And I think that's a very, very good thing.
To say nothing of our other writer's other game that he's working on right now, which is called Astronaut the Best, which is a very like weird experimental game, which I hope everybody checks out when it's ready. Um, like space program simulator with just the worst astronauts. It's a pretty wacky game. If you like the humor in Wintermoor, you should check out Astronaut the Best when it's ready.
I'll definitely check that out.
Too dumb before .space. That's their website.
Yes, too dumb dot for space, or too dumb for
No,
dot
too
space.
dumb for .space. Yeah.
I love it.
Got that rare .space domain name.
So, with that, we're going to wrap up the interview. I want to thank you all for a fantastic time here talking about Wintermoor Tactics Club. Where can people find you online if they want to reach out to you? Ben?
Oh, yeah. So you can find us online at wintermoortc.com, or if you just want to get our delectable hot takes on Twitter, you can find me at WalkerB, WALKERB.
Yeah, and I'm my personal Twitter is at Kyla_go, so KYLA_go, and I also do a biweekly podcast with some friends. I know everybody does a podcast, but we do like a book club style thing for games called Feedback Force. So if you want to look up Feedback Force on SoundCloud, we play a lot of like weird indie games, among other things. And we analyze the game design in them, and that's a fun time. So
You did Valheim, right?
we're thinking of doing Valheim. We haven't done Valheim yet. We're doing Loop Hero right now because Loop Hero is the other Zeitgeist game.
So good.
Loop Hero is quite good. Yes.
Yeah, and you can find me on the Twitter at RYEANDER at Ryander. And then I also do a podcast that is Pretentious Game Ideas. I think our most recent episode is actually the Wintermoor one. So that's more of a deep dive on like specific combat things. But and that one's a lot more just me interviewing random people from the industry with some of my friends and talking about different games, and specifically like a mechanic or like a major trope in a lot of games, and kind of like elaborating it where it's used well, where it's used badly, like the kind of impact it has. So it's meant as like if you're a game design student or something. Like I think most of our audience is game design college students. So but yeah, that's what you're interested in. It's we talk to some people who are much better game designers than I am, so you can pick their brains vicariously through me.
Did you say what the name of the podcast is?
Yes, Pretentious Game Ideas.
Oh, that's the name. Okay, I thought that was just the subject.
No, yeah. I mean, there are I do spew a lot of pretentious game ideas, but no, it is actually, yeah. It's an inside joke.
All right.
As most podcasts are.
I love it. I love it. And I'm Jonas Rosland at Jonas Rosland on the Twitter, and of course hitsave.org and at hitsaveorg is our Twitter. And with that, thank you, Ben, Kyla, and Ryan for a fantastic time talking about Wintermoor Tactics Club. It's been super, super fun. Until next time, have a good one.